Businessman at Wellington Central, certainly been through a lot like all hospitality firms over the last 2 years, then had the protests and is now facing the challenges that many businesses are, such as getting enough people to work and actually serve their customers. And it's that shortage of people which is leading to a shortage of goods and services, which is one half of inflation and the cost of living crisis. So I'd just like to invite Boise to make a couple of comments, and then we'll crack into our policy document. Boise, thanks for having us.
Thank
you may want to come over.
Come over? Okay.
We have a situation in small business, especially in the CBDs of Wellington, Auckland, Christchurch in the past and as well as now, where you try to meet an infrastructure of sales, like an umbrella. So we can't meet that infrastructure of sales. We've still got a model of everyone working from home and not enough multiplier effect of people coming through the country. We can't meet an infrastructure to break even, let alone make profit, and we can't meet an infrastructure of staff to meet the sales, okay? Not even a break-even level. So we're in a situation of small businesses having to find equity from wherever they can and mobile capital, and it's incredibly difficult if you don't have any access to those. So you're just seeing ghettos arriving in both Auckland and Wellington in pockets of the CBD. It's not a good place to be.
Oh, well, look, thank you very much, Boise. This cost of living crisis was actually first called by ACT on December 13 last year, after we heard from people up and down the country on our various tours and listening exercises that people were feeling squeezed from every angle by rising prices at the checkout, the pump, and just about everywhere they go, particularly the cost of housing. Our first cost of living document, released on that day, December 13 last year, Hard Labour, was the one that called the cost of living crisis, and like dominoes over subsequent months, we've seen first the National Party, then Labor accept and admit that there is a cost of living crisis, and yet all the while ACT is proud to be the party that puts out practical proposals, actions the government could take if it wanted to reduce the cost pressure that Kiwi families are facing every day. We've released not only that first document, but our alternative budget, which showed how we'd reduce expenditure by $6.8 billion and give the average worker around $2,000 in tax relief so they have more money to fight the rising prices that they've already faced. Today we release our latest effort to put new ideas into the political debate, practical steps a government could take if it wished to lower the pressure on Kiwi families' budgets. So we believe the cost of living crisis is now not just a question of why are prices so high, but why is the political system so unresponsive? Reducing petrol excise tax and public transport fees doesn't hit the underlying drivers of inflation. It simply transfers money from the government accounts to the public's accounts for a limited time. Similarly, the cost of living payment is a transfer of cash, but it doesn't affect the underlying drivers. Today we'd like to present, when our various MPs have worked on these in their portfolios, a series of ideas that would help actually change the cost structure for New Zealanders. We talk about free trade, reducing $200 million worth of tariffs that are still levied on things that New Zealand families like to buy. We talk about immigration and the fact that we still apply a labour market test to every employer when we all know that there is a labour crisis. We talk about a materials equivalence register, telling councils they must allow equivalent materials to be used. We talk about reducing taxation that New Zealanders pay so that they're able to fight those costs. We talk about incentivising councils to allow development. We talk about reducing the objection rights that people have to stop infrastructure being developed, and we talk about opening up Overseas Investment Act requirements so that if you're from an OECD country and you're a foreign supermarket, you can invest in New Zealand and bring some real competition. I'm going to ask each of our MPs to briefly state some of the key points that are in this document as pertain to their portfolios, starting with our Deputy Leader and Trade Spokesperson, Brooke van Velden, talking a little bit more about the effect of tariffs on the costs that people face. Brooke.
Oh, well, thank you, David. And as David said, the government currently levies around $200 million per year through tariffs on goods that are imported to New Zealand, that cost is taken up by New Zealand consumers, people buying simple items like clothing or chocky bickies. And we have calculated that there are so many costs that New Zealanders are facing through this cost of living crisis that could be reduced by unilaterally removing these remaining tariffs. I think it's the right thing to do because New Zealand for decades now has preached the gospel of free trade internationally, and it's not right that we still have a few remaining tariffs that are increasing items and basic necessities for New Zealanders.
Yeah, that's about $200 million a year in tariffs, including an estimated $40 million on clothing. Depending on the country of origin and the free trade agreements in place, that can add $20 to the cost of a school uniform for kids. So tariffs are still a substantial cost faced by New Zealanders. We believe in free trade. We believe that that should be ended. Brooke is also our housing spokesperson, and we also have new ideas for how we could reduce the cost of materials. We see an 18% increase in the cost of building materials year on year, and Brooke's got some more ideas about how we could reduce that.
Thanks, David. And inflation has gone through the roof. Builders are finding it really hard to find materials to build homes with, and they're also finding it a very long, costly process to get homes built through councils expanding the process. So we have two policies here. We believe there should be a materials register created through MB and a materials equivalence register that allows for any international material that anybody can prove is exactly the same as something that's already allowed for in New Zealand. That should be allowed to be used by builders up and down New Zealand here. We are over-regulated in the building materials market. We also believe that we can incentivise councils to allow for buildings to be developed. And what's holding back development is the lack of infrastructure. And the government could pick up my member's bill, which would allow for 50% of the GST from every new home that's developed to go to the local council that issues the consent. That would incentivise councils to allow for more development in their areas, and it has a real kicker. If you incentivise more and you develop more in your area, you get more money. So these are the practical solutions that New Zealanders are facing, and these are the practical solutions that ACT is giving to New Zealanders to help for the cost of living crisis and get more homes built.
And closely related to the cost of housing is the cost of infrastructure. The cost of getting goods to market. People say that they pay a lot more in New Zealand for the same things that are available overseas, and they're right. That is in large part related to distribution costs and the lack of competition in a sparsely populated, lengthy, mountainous country. Getting infrastructure built and getting goods to market in a competitive way is essential for bringing prices down. To talk about that, we have a former civil engineer and our transport and infrastructure spokesperson, Simon Court. Simon.
Thank you, David. Yeah, the 900-page RMA is the single biggest obstacle to getting infrastructure built in a timely and cost-effective way. It makes no sense at all to use the same environmental laws to protect Fiordland's natural wonders as it does to decide whether a subdivision should be built somewhere like Henderson in West Auckland. What ACT says is that our RMA reform would make it easier to build key infrastructure in a timely and cost-effective way. It'll give Kiwis more freedom to use their land, and actually it will give decision-making back to communities and take it away from bureaucrats. Most importantly, it will make it easier to get consents where those will be needed.
Dr. James McDowell is ACT's immigration spokesperson. He and his wife actually still run an immigration law firm. They are intimately involved in people trying to bring workers into the country, people who would like to be New Zealanders trying to come here and work. James made a number of observations about the way that the skilled migrant visa works at the moment. May have been appropriate for a time when New Zealand was trying to stop people coming here or limit immigration. Totally inappropriate rules in the middle of a labour crisis, and I bring James to talk a little bit more about that.
Thanks, David. Look, the Labour Party's anti-immigration ideology is really coming to a head, and we've got rampant skills shortages and worker shortages across any sector of New Zealand. Now, it makes absolutely no sense that under the new work visa scheme that employers have to convince the government or convince Immigration New Zealand that they're finding it hard to get staff. It is a completely pointless and bureaucratic exercise that the government has persisted with. So that's called the labour market test, as David mentioned, and we would get rid of that as an immediate fix for that problem. Also in that system is the new wage rules. So different sectors have to pay certain amounts above the New Zealand minimum wage. This is micromanaging from the government. Again, it just puts more costs on businesses and makes it harder to employ people. So these are all issues that deal with, well, they cause inflation, one of the drivers of inflation. Again, another thing that we would get rid of in the new scheme is this bonding of an employee to an employer. You know, the government says that they want to take migrant exploitation seriously. They've just done a review on it, but they've persisted with this idea that they have to be tied together. Now, this is, in a sense, a modern form of slavery and something that we actually don't want in our immigration system. And having that worker mobility will actually make it easier for employers to hire people because there's less paperwork to get them in the first place. So those are what we would do to the current work visa system. For the residency system, the new green list that the government's put out, well, we would say to nurses and tradespeople like plumbers and electricians that we want you here just as much as we want doctors. So we would merge that green list into one list and give fast-track residency to all of those professionals. So these are just some practical, immediate solutions that we're proposing to deal with labour shortages. Thank you.
Yeah. And someone who's been acutely affected by the labour shortage just this weekend is ex-rural spokesperson Mark Cameron. In fact, I've seen photographic evidence just in the last few days of Mark actually pulling a cow with a rope, calf out of a cow, due to the massive shortage of farm labourers. He's been up there helping calve himself. And actually people up and down New Zealand in the rural sector are finding they don't have enough people for calving season, for harvest, for planting, you name it, there's not enough people to do it. And that is one of the reasons we've seen a significant increase in the cost of food. To talk a little bit more about the cost structures that are being put onto food, we have Mark Cameron.
Thank you, David. Morning, everyone. Yes, as Parliament's resident farmer, we've got a real cost of living crisis, coupled to the fact that we've got a labour crisis. Now, we all know that we've got a productivity problem in rural New Zealand and across New Zealand as a whole. I can't get staff. Most rural New Zealanders are struggling with this issue, and by virtue, it is putting a lot of on-farm pressure. James McDowell just alluded to the fact that we can't get people in on farms. We've got horticulturalists with fruit rotting on the ground. We've got to have an expedited process to get labour into New Zealand to mitigate the concerns that rural New Zealanders are facing. I'm certainly one of those, and I know in my travels up and down rural New Zealand, this is a profound problem. Yeah. Thank you very much.
And of course, there's no point growing food if you can't get it to market. One of the challenges we have in New Zealand is a low competition environment for supermarkets. We also have a government department in the form of the Overseas Investment Office whose job it is to stop competitors entering the New Zealand market, or at least make it very difficult for them to do so. Thinking about that is somebody originally from a fellow OECD country, which we don't like to mention at this particular juncture, but Damien is our Associate Finance spokesperson and would like to talk about how we make it easier to get supermarket competition into the New Zealand economy.
Thanks, David. Food prices have gone up from June 2021 to 2022 between 6.5% to 8%, and the government's performatory reaction was to blame the greedy supermarkets. ACT has 4 practical policies in this area that will help. No sane company would come to New Zealand to develop a supermarket chain unless it was allowed to develop a full-service grocery model. So that means the RMA has to be modified to allow this to happen. It means that we need to attract foreign investment from friendly OECD countries that can be fast-tracked here. At the moment, it's like North Korea without the nukes trying to get money into this country. Thirdly, we need to actually look at the farm gate prices because of over-regulation, winter grazing. That's had an impact as well. But the key aspect is inflation. And the government has only itself to blame with regards to fueling prices inside the supermarket chains. We've made a start with regards to locations and freeing up sites for competition, but to bring sanity to this market and to attract the big brands that we require to increase that competition, we need to develop that full service model, and I don't think the government's actually addressing that in a holistic fashion.
Yeah, thanks, Damien. I just add one final policy that ACT actually released way back is our climate change refund. We have an emissions trading scheme that's taking in about $1 billion a year, around about $12 a fortnight for the average family's electricity bill. ACT's climate refund policy would take that $1 billion and give it back as an individualised grant. A family of four would receive around about $750 a year as a carbon tax refund. They'd be able to use that money however they please. If they keep using it for emissions-intensive products and services, then of course they're contributing to the ETS. But those who reduce their carbon emissions are effectively being subsidised by those who don't. So it's an environmentally friendly policy and a family policy. Carbon tax refunds being used as in Canada. One of the things that it does is it makes climate policy sustainable because people see the emissions trading scheme as something that actually pays out a benefit to individuals and families over time while retaining the incentive to reduce your emissions. So that is something that I think we should be doing right now rather than spending so much money as we are, $1 billion a year, on various climate emission reduction programs where businesses receive the money. It should be going to households struggling with the cost of living crisis. With that, we've produced a suite of ideas, some that we've had for some time that have become more relevant and we now wish the government had adopted a long time ago. Others that are new ideas that ACT's observed as we've looked around the country for ways to reduce the underlying inflationary pressures and give people some relief from this cost of living crisis. I'm very happy to take any questions.
Can you explain how that $750 for a family of four wouldn't be inflationary?
Yeah, simply that what's inflationary is government running deficits. That's how you get a fiscal impulse. That carbon tax refund is part of ACT's alternative budget, where we show we'd reduce expenditure by a total of $6.8 billion. That would reduce the deficit that the government runs, and by reducing the amount of fiscal impulse, that's how you reduce inflation. Once you've done that, you have room to give cash back to people so that they can deal with the price rises that have already occurred, because at the moment you've got government expenditure which is inflationary, you've got government deficits which are inflationary, and you've got no relief for families facing those costs.
If you get rid of tariffs, don't you reduce all your leverage when it comes to free trade negotiations?
Well, that's an excellent question. If you get rid of tariffs, do you lose the ability to give them away as a bargaining chip in future trade negotiations? The truth is that the objections to free trade agreements with New Zealand are almost exclusively around agriculture. We don't have any agricultural tariffs to give away. The question is, why do we put tariffs on chocolate biscuits, on Chardonnay, on clothes for kids' school uniforms? We even have tariffs on trains. I would think a country that wanted to get serious about public transport would be trying to get the best and cheapest locomotives they could.
But doesn't, if you don't have that quid pro quo, why would anyone else drop their tariffs on us?
Well, the thing is that they're doing it even though we don't have any meaningful tariffs that are relevant to them. So agricultural tariffs, that would be a bargaining chip, because that's where most of the tension is, as you saw recently with the EU free trade agreement. However, having tariffs on clothes, well, I guess we could maybe drop those if we wanted a free trade agreement with Bangladesh. But at the moment, something that are adding. We estimate $40 million of cost to people buying clothes, and it's probably mainly clothes that kids wear from places like that. So, this is a real cost for families buying school uniforms and so on.
And on immigration, the complaint always comes back to dropping restrictions that you keep low-cost migrants, drive down wages. What do you say to that?
Well, there's clearly no problem with low wages right now. You've got a massive inflationary problem. What we need to do is make businesses productive so that they can produce goods and services so there's more to buy so people's wages go further. The issue is there's massive cost pressure right through the economy. What we need to do is take the heat out, produce more goods, allow people to have more to buy. That's your challenge.
Just further on immigration, what would you like to see immigration get back to?
Well,
Come forward, James.
Yes. This is why we don't pick numbers for immigration. Obviously, numbers are capped in the current scheme, but I think at the end of the day, what we're seeing with, the reason we're getting so many skill shortages is the government intervening so much into business and saying who they can and can't hire. So it's this micromanaging for business, basically. So we won't.
You don't have a number of what you would like to see immigration return to?
Well, we're currently about 60,000 people short, based on the fact that New Zealanders are going overseas in record numbers and being poached by different countries around the world. There is an absolute war on talent at the moment. New Zealand has been very, very slow to get onto this, so we've got to deal with the immediate solution of the fact that immigration is very low, people are leaving, and the government should not be micromanaging businesses and saying that they can or can't hire. I wouldn't rest on that number. We'll see how it actually continues on.
And I know that you would actually keep the accredited work scheme, just tweak it, is that right? So you would still require employers to become accredited, because one of the issues with that, of course, is that they can go and apply, and it's about, I think, sort of $600 or something per application. But so you would still keep that scheme, you would just tweak it.
So what we're saying is part one of this is we would tweak the system as an immediate fix. They are pretty significant tweaks, though, to remove the labour market tests and the wage rules. That does actually change the nature of the system quite a lot, and also, allowing employees to move between accredited employers. So those will be some very productive changes. In the long term, I mean, look, I've said since August last year, or late July, I think it was, when the accredited scheme saw the light of day, that we've been opposed to the scheme for a whole range of reasons, because it would actually lead to this crisis that we're seeing right now. So fundamentally, I've already gone on the record saying I oppose the scheme. I think in the long term, we'll be revisiting the whole immigration system.
And on the OECD, opening, sort of scrapping the Overseas Investment Act for OECD countries, is that specifically just supermarket chains, or every single person in an OECD country is able to buy property in New Zealand again?
Yeah, the higher level to the bill is to attract foreign capital to create jobs and businesses here in New Zealand. We're capital starved in this country, we're infrastructure starved, and there's something wrong in the middle there, that money is not connecting to our country. So the idea is that anybody that's a friendly nation who wants to trade with us and already pre-qualified, that they should be fast-tracked through the OECD process.
And citizens in those 38 OECD countries would be able to buy property here as well?
No, it would exclude residential property.
So it's just
yeah, it's business capital.
And so while you're at the microphone, want to explain that North Korea comment?
Sorry?
While you're at the microphone, want to explain that North Korea comment?
Well, basically, we are, there's several countries in the Middle East, North Korea. These are countries that we rank really at the bottom of attracting foreign capital. And it's got to change, because we need another leg to the economy. We need more income in this country. And if we can't tax and prosper, so we have to actually bring in capital. So my analogy there is that it's just difficult to get it in, and it's the same in those countries. So, we believe...
Do you genuinely see New Zealand as North Korea without the news?
Well, no,
I think he could take a joke.
No, it's a fair call if you look at it on a per capita basis. But, there's other countries like Estonia, Latvia doing better than us. We're just going backwards on every single international benchmark.
Human rights abuses going on there, the stories we hear from the defectors.
Yeah, but that's why we're focusing our strategy around the OECD countries, which are similar to us. Like, they've got great companies that they've built. They've got capital that is just private families, and that's why we want them to come here. You can't bring the European Union to you. You have to bring the countries to you.
No, I ask you a question, wasn't sure. David thinks that it's about practical solutions. For a business like yours, which one of these proposals, or which ones of these proposals would make a difference?
The immediate one is freeing up immigration and freeing us up, not just hospitality but small business, to actually staff appropriately. So we're not even staffing enough to meet break even. We can't provide a staffing infrastructure to meet the sales we've got, and we're not even at 70%. The CBDs haven't even got to 70%. So without a staffing infrastructure, and you've got to also remember the staff, if you get immigration going and you get the staff coming in, they also spend that money. And a lot of them are on their OEs, on their working holidays, the visas, etc. They're spending as they're going. They're not taking that money away. So it's another multiplier and another driver in the local economy. And they feed hospitality, they feed retail, and they feed the local economy. So that's the major one immediately. Yeah.
We have opened for working holiday weeks. Have you seen any sort of backpackers come through? None at all?
No.
Wow. Have you been sort of advertising?
We're continually advertising, the whole industry is, and I don't know a business that's not continually looking for staff at the moment. Some days, we have to shut parts of the business. We can't offer table service. So just to open on the weekend for the test match, we had to shut on the Monday so that the staff weren't overworked at the other end of the week. And you've got to also remember that the New Zealand staff, because they've been locked up and in the lockdowns, etc., they don't have the productive capacity that they did pre-COVID. Okay, so you've got small business owners driving these models continually. I'm dressed like this for a reason. I do up to 70 hours a week in the kitchen. I can't find the staff to do that job. So I am a general manager, I'm a director, and I'm totally hands-on. And that goes for small business generally, you will find. And we're just small people. We don't have access to the capital. So the next one is you need that mobile capital coming in. We need to open up to the world. And your comments in regard to North Korea, it's an analogy. But you need an analogy to try and hit home how serious it is for small business. We're being squeezed out.
Is this the worst, as far as staff shortage goes, is this the worst you've seen it?
Yes. So I've been doing this for 40 years, and this is absolutely appalling. This is the worst situation I've ever seen small business. So.
Michael Wood made a comment not that long ago about how perhaps small businesses need to lift conditions.
That was another river of filth that came out of his mouth.
What do you think of that?
I was offended. Our wages in 4 years have gone up 40%. So, no, seriously, he has no idea what's going on.
I guess what else needs to happen to make it? I mean, we're obviously in a winter session now, which is hard to attract backpackers to the likes of this. Are there any sort of other incentives that you think might work to really attract that market to New Zealand?
Well, I think ACT is on the right track. You've got to open up the country. You've got to make the country attractive. I mean, winter's okay. I mean, if you get Queenstown driving and your traditional winter attractions driving, then you've got an immediate driver. Auckland should be an automatic driver. It's an international city. Wellington's a capital city. It was once the cafe capital of the world. It had more cafes than New York. It's like we've done it in the past, but at the moment we're in a 4-year conundrum. We're compressing our economy drastically without any. Everything's reactive at the moment. We have to have proactive policies like you're hearing now, and we need them quickly. Do we have to wait another year for a change of government? The government need to listen and start acting on them.
Cool.
Can I ask you quickly about euthanasia?
Yep.
Yeah, there's a review of obviously out. What from your reading of it, is the law working as intended?
The law is working exactly as intended. If you look at the number of people applying, it's about 1 to 2% of all people who die in New Zealand each year. That's about what we expected based on international trends. It's also the case that there are people who apply and go all the way through. There are people who are declined because they don't meet the criteria. There are people who get permission and die naturally or die another way. These are all the choices that we would expect to occur in a system that's functioning. So I'm very proud of the way that the law is operating to date. I noticed that people who are opposed said there wouldn't be any complaints. Well, actually, there are complaints. There's been 4 complaints about the assisted dying service and its operation, but there haven't been any complaints about breaches of the law. Of the 4 complaints, there have been 3 are already resolved. People said that there wouldn't be enough doctors and nurses who are prepared to be involved. Actually, 130 medical professionals at the time of the report have stepped up, spread across the country, including 44 in the South Island. So the assisted dying law is working exactly as promised. I note the one frustration is with the fact it excludes some people, particularly people with neurodegenerative diseases. I've never resigned from the fact that I introduced a law modelled on Canada's that would allow people with a grievous and irremediable medical condition but may not be terminal to access assisted dying in New Zealand. Now, we made political compromises. We couldn't get the Green Party's votes on that basis. But the law, as I introduced it, I believe is still the correct one. And I regret, but I'm not surprised, that people are now making that criticism as the laws come into operation. I'd also just say, could I say one more thing? That many people who spread all sorts of absolute rubbish and misinformation about assisted dying, where are they now? And a lot of those people ought to be held accountable for the way they tried to misinform and skew the debate back in the day.
One of the some people are actually disappointed that of sort of the restrictions of the Act as it stands, and there was, I think, a hope that they would sort of be relaxed or not relaxed, perhaps broadened over time. Is that the way that you see the Act going, that there will be sort of a broadening of the conditions?
Well, my position is that we got the details right, and I think that's been vindicated in the report. However, the one thing that I disagree with about my own bill is that compromise we made to get the votes over in Parliament, and that was excluding people who have neurodegenerative diseases, people with a grievous and irremediable medical condition. I believe in time the law should change to its original intent to include those people. I'm disappointed and saddened that there's people like that making those complaints because they should be included. They should have the choice as well. But at the end of the day, I had a choice of getting the law we got or getting no law at all based on the votes in Parliament at that time.
How long do you think that will take for, like, I guess there's naturally going to be a bedding in sort of period for the Act before you're able to then sort of broaden it a little bit. Like, so how long do you think?
Yeah. Look, I hear the concerns of people who said there'd be a slippery slope, the law would get in and it would change. I've always said that their fears were ill-founded. I think the right way is for there to be a 3-yearly report, which will be due at the end of 2024. At that time, people should take stock, and Parliament should consider whether it returns the law to the way it was originally introduced. Other than that, I think it's in a good space, but it could do with having its original intent restored, and after that first 3-yearly review would be the right time for Parliament to consider it, I believe, but that's still a wee way off. Yeah. Could I just finish off a few issues relating to our topic in our release today? I'll just make a couple of comments. I think one of the question about what the immigration numbers should be, I suspect with respect that's going to be seen as a bit of a 2019 question. The challenge for developed countries around the world now is just the war for talent and attracting people at all. You look at the UK, have just extended the generosity of their working holiday program. Spain's massively increased their working holiday program for us. The Australians are talking about giving New Zealanders more rights. You can take each of those in isolation, but as a pattern, Western countries are starting to compete for talent at all. So I'm not worried about us getting back to 60,000. I'm worried about the fact we're currently down 60,000 and we've just been ranked second worst in the world as a place to move to. New Zealand is going to have to focus on getting more competitive to attract people at all. I think that's the real problem. And as for North Korea, I don't think any of us could be truly innocent of calling different countries the hermit kingdom from time to time. And the facts are that New Zealand's restrictiveness on overseas investment has ranked us as badly as 4th worst on that topic. So sadly, while clearly we don't share any of the other dreadful characteristics of North Korea and respect of foreign investment, which is the topic today, we're almost as close as they are, and that is something that New Zealand needs to address if we want to get investment and ideas, be more competitive and fight the cost of living crisis. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Thank you.